Hi, everyone. I'm Kerry CASSIDY from Project Camelot, and I am here tonight to talk to Terry Gillett and actually adjusting the screen here a bit. Using a different computer. We're having some computer issues, and it looks like they're attacking my website right now. So this is just all in a day's work. Crazy stuff going on right now. So Terry is a computer security guy. And I'm afraid that due to some of the logistical issues I'm having here, I don't have his bio in front of me, but hopefully he can identify himself. We're going to be talking about Mindware and Mind War, access to mind control technologies, open source, etc. So, Terry, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. So what I'd like you to do is sort of give yourself a bit of an intro, a better intro than I just gave you, a little more detailed.
Okay. So what I do is I do blogging. Okay, I'm a blogger. I also do a lot of security research. My big thing is technology, open source, but also I like to do white hat security research, look at different things involving hackers. There are actually a very big variety of hackers out there: black hats, gray hats, script kiddies, and hacktivists. So if you think about it, I don't really like to cover topics with regards to government. I look at things outside of government. So to a lot of people's imagination, you're going to think that, Mind War is a government thing. But like I say, you can go and Google search this stuff and do the research yourself. But the experiences that I've had over the last couple of years with this technology is actually third party. None of this stuff that I've dealt with is actually official. If some of this stuff is official technology, then it's obviously being hacked by black hats. Okay, this is one thing that people just don't seem to understand: is that black hat hackers can in fact replicate this mind war technology that's built by the government, and then they can literally copy this stuff, every component, everything that comes along with it, to the absolute T and to the I. They can cross the T's and dot the I's and make it look almost identical, and basically make it look as if it's real, authentic technology. You got to remember, some of the technologies that I've talked about on my blog over the last couple of years is based on the fact that there are, in fact, hacker spaces all over North America, all over the Western world. What are the chances that some of these people have decided to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to build a device that's going to screw with someone's head? You know, that happens. And okay. I've realized that, you know, the simplest thing you need, and I'm going to show you something here. It's called software-defined radio. You can buy these things off of Amazon for $30. Software-defined radio is essentially like a digital ham radio. It's like a digital amateur radio. It can do a lot of things. A lot of these things can be used for these particular mind war applications outside of, you know, a sovereign government. It can be used to screw with somebody. You can even use it for surveillance. Okay, I've read blogs from black hats who have basically made and replicated, you know, IMSI catching technologies used by police, and they built this stuff themselves with software-defined radios that cost, well, about $400 more than what this device costs. And then they use Raspberry Pi devices, which is basically something like this. So if you think about it, this is a Raspberry Pi. Obviously, everybody knows what a Raspberry Pi device is, but that just tells you how scary and how daunting that technology is, especially when it falls into the wrong hands. Most technology is neutral, right? It can be used for good or bad. But the fact of the matter is that people out there are ballsy enough to build technologies that screw with people's heads. It's that simple, right? I mean, obviously, the big thing is a lot of people have this thing against government. I get that exists. That's all over the Western world. You can't help that. But there are people out there who are willing to rebel against their governments and even use technologies that the governments use against them. At least that's the way they think of it. and they can use that technology to mess with the government, but they can also mess with the public too. That's another thing that these guys do, and they do it quite regularly. Okay, I can think of gangs that have replicated this technology and have decided to use it against their rivals, or terror groups for that matter, who use it against their rivals, or who use it against the government, and who use it against the general public. It's not uncommon. It's not some crackpot conspiracy. If you put this stuff together, you'll find that this stuff is actually very real. I mean, I found websites where people are basically openly talking about these things and building this stuff. I don't know if you've ever heard of biohackers. Now, a biohacker is basically somebody who, instrumentally plays with their body, modifies their technologies to basically work with their bodies. And it basically means that these guys can just, like that there are hacker spaces. Okay, literally, there are hacker spaces all over the United States and all over Canada, where I am, and basically the technology can be easily acquirable. And I mean, like, think about it. You got all these kids who come out of university with computer sciences degrees and no work. What do you think they're going to do in their spare time? Think about that. Nobody ever.
That's kind of a great summation. Now, what I'd like to do, though, is find out a little bit more about you. So, are you in the military, or did you just get out of the military?
No, actually, no. I've never actually been in the military. I've had family in the military. I can't actually join the military because I'm disabled.
Okay.
So disabled people can't be in the military. In Canada, I can't do that because apparently that's just not allowed. I've had family in the armed forces. A lot of them are veterans. Most of them served in the Army and the Air Force in Canada, so Royal Canadian Air Force, the Canadian Army. So I've had some exposure. Not so much like the stuff that I've talked about on my blog is stuff that you get off the internet. I just worked it out myself. That's all it is, right? Because I have an interest in technology. Number one, I'm studying to be a systems administrator, to do IT work, and basically, I stumble across this stuff on the net, and I think to myself, I work out this hypothesis where I think, okay, it's possible that a black hat could do this and do that, and then basically deploy the technology against somebody. There could be a gang of, black hat activists who think, okay, let's use this guy's house as our Hackaday project. I don't know if you've ever been
So what would they do, theoretically?
Well, what they would do is they would actually just walk into someone's house, and there are people ballsy enough in my home country where they'll just walk into someone's house and they'll start playing around with the electrical system. Like I say, it's a long story. Canada is not the United States, but there are some similarities between, the political points of view of people here. There seems to be more of a basis of hardline leftism in Canada than there is in the United States. So a lot of these black hats have a political philosophy that is far left, and they figure that they can walk onto anybody's properties if they're hackers, and some of them are, and they can turn a person's house into a black hat project. If they feel vengeful enough to do it, they will do it.
All right,
and they don't care.
If a person was there in person, you would actually see them. You could call the police or whatever. So I'm not sure. Are you? What would be more daunting would be an ability to do something long distance. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, and the other thing too is that you can do this stuff, and I would suspect that there is people out there who can actually remotely control this technology. Someone goes and installs the hardware in someone's house, hypothetically, and then somebody, 2 or 3 provinces away from the province I live in can basically sit in their basement comfortably and just sit there and, dial out some kind of code or command line to basically send a signal to the houses they've basically hijacked for their own, third-party private Hackaday project. I mean, that's definitely a possibility.
And what kind of mind control are we talking about?
We're talking about technology that you can build from software-defined radios. So this thing right here, this is a $30 software-defined radio. Some of the software-defined radios I've found on the internet are somewhere in about the $400 to $700 range that have, the property to pick up on radio signals ranging from ultra high to low. Okay, and Mindware devices, I figure, are basically built to channel radio signals from one point to another, but it's designed specifically to target a certain part of the human brainwave, basically.
Okay, but so, what would it do? Are we talking about, people that complain about being targeted individuals? Are you talking about that kind of an attack? And what part of the brain?
Well, I'm looking at the alpha, beta, delta, gamma, theta brainwaves. So these people obviously have, knowledge about this technology because they've either taken it off the internet and realized they could capitalize on it. And basically people who could replicate the technology, at least to the best of their ability. They have the education because they went to university, took computer sciences, neurology, and possibly psychology, and they just decided, okay, well, I'm going to use this and see what I can do with it. I mean, it's not impossible, but I mean, aside from what the government does, I don't even know what they do half the time anyways, aside from what I've been able to read online and research. I figure I've been targeted by somebody for, a period of time. I could say probably about 6 or 7 years, but I don't even know who my attacker is. I don't know who my adversary is.
Do you know how to launch a counterattack in your case?
You know what? That's not really a good idea. You wouldn't want to launch a counterattack because that may actually make the situation worse. It's always just good to observe and write down what's happening and just kind of take note of what's happening, and then you can maybe do something about it later on. I mean, I have some ideas as to how to catch these guys. For example, most people assume that directed energy attacks only come through these Mindware devices, but I've actually realized that a lot of these attacks can actually come from common IoT devices like smartphones, tablets, modern computers, and even Wi-Fi routers. Because you got to remember, if you take an acoustometer or a Geiger counter and you launch a DOS attack against the Wi-Fi router, you put the acoustometer to the Wi-Fi router or a Geiger counter, it's going to give you an expendable reading of high energy pumping out of that device. I tested this out myself about a week ago and realized that, directed energy attacks can actually occur from distributed denial of service attacks, brute force attacks, metasploit attacks, and even team split attacks. And this software that these people use is commonplace. They're using Kali Linux, they're using Def Linux, they're using Backbox Linux, they're using older copies of Backtrack Linux, which is Kali Linux now, and they're basically using these things in a coordinated fashion, and nobody seems to realize that can actually happen, and it happens quite often, because, the only way that somebody is going to, do some serious physical damage to somebody is if they launch constant DOS attacks on a person's Wi-Fi device. And you got to remember that Wi-Fi radiation doesn't just stick to one particular area, it broadcasts. It broadcasts out of a room, and you can pick up a signal. You can pick up the Wi-Fi radiation in one room where it's intense, and then you can still pick it up in the other room, right? So this stuff channels out of the routing devices. Like any wireless device gives off Wi-Fi radiation.
Right.
Okay. A computer can give off Wi-Fi radiation too. Okay. So when I tested this out myself and basically brute forced my own Wi-Fi router, I noticed something because I'm actually very sensitive to radiation. I'm very sensitive to radiation bursts. I feel sick in my stomach. I feel dizzy, nauseated. Most people would feel that. I'm sitting in front of the computer and dialing out commands, and then all of a sudden, I feel dizzy all of a sudden because, first of all, my computer's right in front of me. It has a wireless card inside of it, but it's pumping out a signal that's being received by the Wi-Fi router itself. So that's a double dose.
Okay.
So that
is that, just out of curiosity, is that how you got into sort of investigating this further, or interested in computer security? Because you seem very interested in that.
Yes, that's actually the reason why, because I've had a situation a while back where I felt like, I was being hit with some kind of directed energy, but I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. And then I finally watched a couple of YouTube videos where people were using acoustimeters to basically measure the amount of Wi-Fi radiation emanating from their Wi-Fi router. And I realized that if somebody sends, a distributed denial of service attack to a Wi-Fi router from a remote point, that basically those 10 or 15 or 20,000 packets can basically take that Wi-Fi signal and expand it tenfold. So basically that's what got me interested in that. Aside from the Mindware technology, I'm convinced that some of these hackers have actually built some of these technologies to correlate with distributed denial of service attacks, brute force attacks, team split attacks, and even metasploit attacks. And that they probably even know that these things work that way because they've studied the dynamics of wireless technologies and they know enough about it to use it against somebody physically. I figure that there are black hats, gray hats, script kiddies, and hacktivists out there that have weaponized people's IoT devices that basically emanate, radiation signals from one point to the other. I mean, think about it. I mean, sure. if you look at a cell phone tower, what do you think a cell phone tower is? That's a giant radiating device.
Right.
I mean, if you were to go stand up, in close proximity to a cell phone tower with an acoustimeter, that thing's going to be going off the charts. That's sending and receiving signals. Okay? So a lot of these guys have a basic understanding of wireless radiation, but they also have a basic understanding of radio signals, and how to manipulate radio signals. Like I say, this stuff is real stuff. You just have to be able to.
But you're interested in the targeting of individuals, it sounds like.
Actually, I'm not interested in that, because I am a TI myself, ma'am. Let's just put it like this. I've been a targeted individual. I know I have. I've been targeted by some kind of group that doesn't like what I do or what I say, and they know how to use this technology against me. I'm just starting to stumble across this myself and realizing that they have been using my own IoT devices against me and weaponizing them against me. Okay. I wouldn't think of it. I wouldn't think of targeting anybody. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to raise awareness that this stuff exists and people need to be more aware of it.
Well, I think that's great. I'm glad you are. And that's why I'm having you on my show. But I am wondering, like, in terms of this situation that we're talking about and the mind control aspects, have you gotten into the mind control aspects? And I noticed that you have like a picture of the I think it's BCI. Is that the BCCI?
Yeah. So basically that's one part of what I'm trying to raise a point about, is that somebody can build mind control devices themselves. I mean, Wired put an article out back in 2014 that talked about devices that were being built by people in hackerspace labs, or basically in meetups, social meetups, where they basically take devices made with Raspberry Pis or Arduino computing boards. So basically, if I were to basically unscrew this here, I would expose the innards of a Raspberry Pi device that could be used and utilized for mind control technology.
Okay.
And I mean that.
What about crowds? Have you looked at the aspect? In other words, you're talking about individuals in their houses. What about if you're saying going to social, meetings or something? Are you saying that they could affect those?
I would say that the hacker spaces. Okay, so hacker spaces would be one point of meetup. And I mean, a lot of university students like to go to hacker spaces, especially if they're taking computer sciences. Some of them could be taking neurology. Some of them could be taking psychology too. and they realize that there's some kind of potential in mind control technology, and even an open source implementation of mind control technology means that they have an opportunity to expand whatever careers they take on after they leave university.
Okay.
So that means, what that means is that basically it creates an opportunity for them to socially exploit somebody, whether it's good or bad. I mean, that's just the thing that exists everywhere. I mean, I don't really think, like, it's really hard to explain these things, but from what I've noticed, that gangs in particular like to use these technologies against their rivals. And if somebody who gets in their way or pisses them off on purpose, or not even intentionally, they can use that technology too. I mean, I've seen a website that showed a little Adreno nanoboard, which is basically, it's about 1.8 millimeters, 1.8 centimeters by 1.8 centimeters in diameter. It's a little tiny thing. You can basically take the components from digikey.com and build a microwave controlling device where it basically plays with your alpha, beta, delta, gamma, and theta brainwaves. This stuff can be built by anybody, right? As long as you follow the directions and you have a pretty good understanding of computers, electronics, computer engineering, or software engineering, they can, anybody could basically build these things, coming out of university, right? So.
Right. Okay. Now I understand that that's the concept. What I'm wondering is have you looked into the mind control aspects from, in other words, as a TI, you've had things sent, at you. So have you looked at?
I've looked at the
defensive measures.
The defense measures would be easy to employ. I figure probably RF shielding. Okay. Even though that's a really expensive thing to do. I've looked into it. I've realized that it might cost me upwards of about $5,000 to basically create some kind of RF shielded environment where I'm not feeling dizzy. I mean, I've run into it every now and again. I mean, I just went to sleep the other night, basically laying in bed, and then all of a sudden the room spun 360 degrees, and I couldn't even figure out why. And then I finally realized that it was either a smart meter attack or it was one of these homemade Mindware devices that some adversary of mine put in my house to basically screw with my head. So, I mean, that's something to consider. Shielding myself from it would be, as easy as putting up, aluminum sheeting or something like that. Basically, putting it on the drywall and just putting more drywall up to basically, cover it up. That's one way to do it because, if you think about it, Faraday cages may actually defend against those things.
Right.
But I wouldn't really know how effective they are because I just don't have the money to actually do this yet. But I'm thinking about creating kind of a space where I could test out what kind of shielding effect works better than what currently exists on the internet for a solution. I mean, some people have their own solutions to things.
Did you happen to see my interview with Sister KERRY Burner?
I didn't, ma'am.
Okay, she is a TI, happens to be, she was studying to be a nun and started reporting on, I guess, some pedophilia and sexual abuse things in her sort of seminary type setting. And then she got heavily targeted by electronics. And she had two, as it happened, kind of serendipity or luck or whatever you want to call it, where women doctors actually came, studied her, found out that indeed she was correct. And she was also they also put nano inside her. And so on, and it's all on my interview, and she had it documented by doctors. So she did she did similar to what you were saying, like you need to put it in writing, right?
Actually, I do have a little bit of evidence to show you what it's like to be targeted with radiation devices. I don't know if the camera will pick up on this, but if you see this, you look at all that teeth there, okay? Being constantly hit with Wi-Fi radiation or any kind of wireless radiation can actually result in loss of enamel.
Uh-huh.
Aside from weakened bones,
okay,
that's one thing I've noticed. So basically, you're right. And as for the mind control stuff, that gets a little weird too. Drug dealers,
right,
drug dealers like to go around and drug people to get people hooked onto their product. But I have another hypothesis. Drug dealers who are involved in these Mindware, Mindware experiments, working with outside groups, can go around and basically dump LSD into something that you commonly use, like, soap and shampoo bottles, or, your body wash or something like that. And they can walk into your house, pick your lock on your door, dump all this stuff, and just basically walk away like nothing ever happened. And then all of a sudden you're in the shower and you're basically just getting a dose of LSD as you're washing, your hair or something like that. And basically that's something that I've noticed, because the area that I live in right now, which is Edmonton, there's a lot of gang activity around here, a lot of drug dealers, and a lot of these guys are very opportunistic people. So obviously they have a lot of time on their hands. There's a lot of people who would think that I'm crazy for saying this, but like I say, anybody can pick a lock. It doesn't have to be. It's not just spies that do those things. It's also gang members too. It's also drug dealers and other nefarious people. So I always look at things both ways. Okay, whatever the government can do, bad people can do it too.
Okay, well, some would say, certainly us, that a lot of government are bad people. I'm sure there are some good people there. There's certainly agendas that involve targeting individuals. There's evidence like smart meters that are built by corporations that are in league with the government, obviously. So if you investigated smart meters and also G5, coming along.
Well, G5 is it's supposed to be it's supposed to be a better improvement from LTE. LTE works great. 4G is kind of slow and, useless. Smart meters, from what I've been able to research, apparently there are people out there who are willing to hack into smart meters. Okay. Another thing I didn't bring up with you before. Have you ever heard of Have you ever heard of Wi-Fi war driving? Are you familiar with that? People who will deliberately drive around in their vehicles, taking Wi-Fi adapters, plugging them into their USB drives on their computers, and just going around in neighborhoods and just basically, searching out SSIDs from people's Wi-Fi routers, brute forcing the routers, and then seeing what kind of security these devices have, or basically criminals who do Wi-Fi war driving, who essentially do the same thing as these white hats would. I wouldn't do these things because obviously you'd get in trouble here for doing those things. It's against the law.
But what's war driving? Why would they do a brute force against your router, so to speak? Is that to get into your computer or what?
It's to get into your computer, but it's also to see what kind of security you have and to see what kind of security conscious person you are. Because that's just the way these guys look at it. If you're just going to use a password on a Wi-Fi router, these guys will think, oh, okay, well, this guy's careless. We can screw with him because he doesn't really seem to care. But if they come across me, well, I don't even use Wi-Fi anymore. I use Ethernet. But my point is that my Wi-Fi routers were always safeguarded with a passphrase, a long string passphrase. These guys could sit out front of my house. I've seen a few, shady looking cars sitting out in front of my house. And I figure, okay, it's another one of these Wi-Fi war drivers, guys on his computer with a Wi-Fi adapter, either built into his computer or he's got one plugged into his USB drive. And he's basically sitting there with Aircrack NG trying to figure out the combination of my passphrase, and he's going to sit there all night long trying to do it. He's never going to figure it out. Those are the kind of guys I'm talking about. They want to see who's security conscious and who isn't, and whoever isn't security conscious and who's basically just lazy with their security, then they'll say, okay, well, we'll walk into his house and start screwing with the guy and see what we can get out of him. That's the kind of people that do those things. I mean, a lot of people just don't realize.
Have you had any interaction with some of these people? I mean, these sound like, to me, maybe you could view them as freelancers that could get hired by the government to do some of these jobs.
Well, freelancers, yeah, but I mean, you know, that depends on the number of them. I wouldn't even really know how many freelancers would do these things, but I mean, for the most part, if the government wants to get into your internet connection, they don't have to sit out in the front of your house and use AirCrackNG or some other program provided by Kali Linux. I mean, I'm just going to look to see what I've got on here. Yeah, I've got AirCrackNG on here, but, you know, they're not going to sit out in front and basically pick at the router. No, they just have to go to the ISP, ask them to put a tap on the internet, and that's it. That's done, right? The metadata goes straight to them, straight to analysis, and that's it.
Okay. So have you ever traced some of the surveillance on you back to source and found that, for example, intelligence agencies were interested in you?
You know what? I don't really think the government's that interested in me. And if they were interested in me, they would have approached me with a business card and told me to call them. But obviously they haven't done that. So they obviously just look at me as a crackpot and they don't really seem to pay too much attention to what I'm doing. So as far as I'm concerned, I've got, you know, job offers from private companies, private IT companies, but they don't look like they're associated with any kind of government at all. It looks like they're mainly just corporate class, and that's about it. So, I mean, I'm looking at IT companies, but I usually look at ethics in an IT company versus what they pay. I mean, I'm not going to work for some company that's going to throw me $50,000 or $60,000 in a salary. You know, I'm going to be able to. I'm going to look at them and I'm going to say, okay, what do you really do, and what are you really doing with people's security, network security? Are you shady? Are you kind of somewhere in between? I mean, that there's IT companies out there that do private contracts, but then there are some IT companies that don't, and the ones that don't, I kind of want to stay the fuck away. Sorry, I want to stay away from, because apparently, because that's just a huge problem. I mean, you know, a white hat is a good person in the computer world where they're basically doing security awareness,
right?
Because, you know, it's basically, hey folks, this is what's happening over here. This is possible with your technology. Are you going to actually be aware of it and be, you know, proactive and be defensive, but on the offensive too, and not let these people get you down? That's what it is. I mean, I usually look at the commoners as most of the problem, where the problem exists. The government, figuratively, I don't know, security professionals in Canada have to be somewhere in the number of about 1 million, maybe less. Canada's not really a big country. We don't have a large-ass population. We're only 38 million people. The United States is somewhere, 300 million plus? That I just don't, you know, like when it comes to, you know, Canada and its security, you know what, they're too overwhelmed, number one, to do anything to a guy like me. So I usually kind of leave out, when it comes to adversaries, I'm looking at, you know, foreign governments as potential adversaries against me, or domestic adversaries outside of governments. So I'm always looking at that too. I do keep up with,
what would they be, you know, seeing? There's kind of an echo. What would they be seeing that you would do that would be problematic from their point of view? In other words, why would even a foreign government think that you were an issue of any kind?
Well, that has a lot to do with, you know, my race, my gender, skin color, right?
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is that there are some people out there, and I mean, I've had some encounters with, I don't know, a couple of years ago, I had a weird encounter with some guy that sounded Ukrainian, but sounded kind of Russian at the same time. So obviously there are some people who come from some of these foreign governments who want to exploit the citizenry so they can get closer to the governments they're targeting. This is a common thing. I mean, I've seen cases like this before where people are basically exploited by foreign governments for whatever foreign agenda they have. I know how to defend myself against that. I basically just ask them a simple question. You know, if they're going to call themselves spies to me, my first question to them is, where's your proof? Where's the proof that you're a spy? Or do you have a badge number? Or do you have a business card? Usually when I ask those questions, they basically just turn around, walk away, and that's about it. Get scared away.
Okay, but are they approaching you to use your skill set? Is that their interest in you?
Yeah, you know, I would say skill set, the things I talk about openly as well. I mean, I don't just cover, you know, technology. I do cover the social sciences too. I kind of have a firsthand experience with psychology. I do talk about things ranging from, you know, the social sciences, which covers psychology. I do know about, you know, certain things regarding mind control and all that stuff, because I've obviously been, you know, mind controlled or have had some kind of mind control done to me. So I've obviously taken the time to research those things, and I openly research that stuff. So somebody's going to come along and say, hey, let's try to use this guy because he might work for us, or he might want to do something for us. We'll just have to convince him that it's a good idea. But, you know, I don't think that's a good idea at all. I have ethics and morals, and you know, I don't know. Mind control is a human rights abuse, and I don't care under what circumstance it is. The bad guys have their own mind control. Good guys got their own mind control too. There seems to be a bit of competition between different types of mind control, bad guys versus good guys. It's basically kind of like a game of tug of war, basically.
Okay, well, are you aware of psychophysiology? In other words, are you looking at the biology of, you know, implants? And because when you're doing mind control, you can target, like if you have nano in your body, if you have certain implants, then that they can target that part of your body very well. And it makes you more vulnerable. Are you kind of aware of that?
I'm very aware of that. I've looked into different types of mind control programs that that obviously Western governments have done. Wired.com is actually quite the resource to go and find out about these things. Because Wired.com covers these things. Other websites really don't touch these things so much. So I've read something about, the Army. I don't know what Army, if it's our Army or if it's your government that does this, but obviously, brain control implants in the back of the skull. That seems a little, I don't know, that just seems creepy. I mean, that aside from cutting open the skull and sticking something like that in the back of the skull, it kind of makes you.
Well, I mean, even dentists, implants in teeth, there is a lot of, the Germans, pioneered stuff like that, especially in Nazi Germany. One might say they brought it back from the time of Atlantis or whatever they did. But, have you looked into that?
I've looked into that somewhat. I'm actually looking at more modern applications, RFID.
Uh-huh.
Realize that RFID is definitely the next thing that's coming into the modern world. RFID exists in every form of technology. I can't think of anything out there that doesn't have RFID. I mean, look at near-field communication devices, okay? Near-field communication devices you find in bank cards, where you basically just walk up to, say if you're going to buy a can of pop at, 7-Eleven or something like that, you just throw down your card and it basically just verifies your card and your account number, and it sends that data to the bank, which basically says, okay, this guy's got, $1.50 in his account. That's near-field communication devices. That's an RFID chip in a bank card. Near-field communication devices in smartwatches and smartphones. Okay, that's another thing. And I mean, those technologies are still in beta mode. I mean, any technology is still in beta mode. I don't care how well developed it is and what its reputation is. Most of these technologies have their different stages. There's alpha, beta, there's delta, there's gamma, there's theta, there's omega. Okay, that's the way I look at it. I look at it like that because that's something I've looked at.
Okay, but
I mean,
whose judgment on that are you taking? Because, a cover up about a certain stage of a technology is very common. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, it is. I would definitely say that. I mean, most things that I've looked at from, the stuff that even my computer that I use right now, okay, even if that came off the assembly line 6 years ago, this thing is still in beta mode. No matter what I do to it, whatever modifications I make to it, I'm going to have to make further modifications to make it work better. So obviously, it's never going to come out of beta mode. Some of the products that I use and some of the things that I could modify my computer with could be still in alpha mode, right? So there's different types of modes. It's just the testing of these things and making it work better. It never really comes out of beta mode because apparently there could be a breakdown in the hardware code, the software code. Because, the only way technology actually works, especially a computer, is the hardware slave process, hardware software slave process. If you don't have one of those two things working with each other and it's working against itself, then it's no longer useful. It's that simple. So, I look at RFID and I think to myself, RFID may look like it's a developed technology. It looks like it's off, it's right off the assembly line, ready to go. But you know what? There's going to be fatal flaws in the technology too. RFID hacking. Okay, once RFID implants go out there, whenever they happen to go out there, basically what's going to happen is you're going to have a bunch of opportunistic black hats who are going to go around hacking into people's RFID chips if they put them in their hands or wear them as wearables or keychains. And then what kind of problems you're going to have then there? Because you can put, like, a lot of these RFID chips, I figure, even if you put encryption on these devices, you know what? No amount of encryption is going to protect you from the bad habits of someone else. It doesn't matter what, right? So, as far as I'm concerned, RFID technology can be hacked one way or the other. That's the way I look at it. So what I'm thinking is basically when it comes down to mind control technology and RFID, what makes you think that some black hat out there isn't going to say, okay, well, I'm going to screw someone's head today, and I'm going to feel good about it when I'm done? That's just what it comes down to. Radio signals, whether they're shortwave or long range, can be exploitable by anybody, and that's just the way I look at it. And it basically,
so when you say radio signals, you're saying that the RFID is using radio signals?
Well, the RFID is using a shortwave radio signal. It's not projecting or broadcasting a long-range signal unless the RFID chip is in within the vicinity of something that's producing a long-range signal, right? So, say you're in the vicinity of a cell phone tower and you've got an RFID in your hand or something, something could basically prompt the device to send a long-range signal, even if it's a shortwave piece of technology. You never know, right? Those things could happen. Software-defined radios can pick up long-range and shortwave too. And software-defined radios are basically pluggable devices that can be used by computers, and RFID could possibly be picked up by that technology too. Because, like I say, if a black hat hacker has replicated an IMSI catcher that's used by police to basically pick up on the cell phone conversations of other people, what are the chances that an RFID chip couldn't be picked up by the same device too, under a different set of circumstances?
Okay, can you hold on 1 minute? I'm going to double check that we're actually on the air because YouTube has been screwing with me lately.
Actually, I got to take a break anyways, so yeah.
Okay, so we'll just take like a few minute break and just come back when if you're all right with that.
Yeah, for sure. It's good.
Okay, great. So everyone, thanks for standing by. We're going to see if we're on the air here. And so if you don't mind, I'm going to double check in the chat and see if this thing is recording the way it's supposed to be doing. Thanks. Okay, it looks like we are on the air, and I'm going to double check this is working.
Cool.
Stand by.
Right.
Okay, we are live, and we're just going to continue this interview. We're actually not going to go for that much longer. I'm going to wait and see if there's some questions in the chat, because we've got quite an active chat room going on here. At the same time, if you're willing, we can let some people, they type in their chat, their questions. So some people might like to ask you some questions. You seem to be very well versed in the technology. Are you, can you say anything about your background in terms of your technical expertise? How far back you go in years and all of that?
You know what? Actually, you know what? I started out in the technology field. Where I started out was basically I was a Windows user 10 years ago. I watched a couple of YouTube videos about Linux, and I looked at the open source software community, and I thought, wow, that's awesome. I got to try this out. That's where I got started. So I'm basically I'm an independent. I kind of come from an independent background. Number one. Number two, a lot of the topics I talk about now, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have, even the slightest clue about some of the things I've researched and some of the topics I've covered on my blog. So it's kind of, I've kind of had to go on a step up basis and kind of teach myself that these things exist and what's possible and what's not possible per se. I've obviously looked at different things in the political sciences field, social sciences field. I've studied a lot of things myself on the internet. Surprisingly enough, I've never gone to a university before. I used to be an oil field worker before I started getting into IT, systems administration. So what I'm doing is kind of a career change.
Wow.
But what this is basically me just kind of, taking my ambitions and passions and just trying to, better myself. But I'm also trying to be ethical at the same time. I mean, you got to remember that there are three types of people in the computer world that knowingly exist. Number one, white hats are your security awareness guys. Gray hats are somewhere between black hat and gray hat. They can be good or bad. And then black hats are the bad guys. And obviously I have a huge issue with black hats and gray hat hackers because, like I say, aside from me being targeted with, Mindware, mind control technologies by, outside groups, I've also had my bank accounts hacked too. So, that kind of says something there too, right? I mean, once somebody hacks into your bank account, that's a pretty big deal. I mean, you're thinking to yourself.
But can you elaborate a bit why somebody would find you so, interesting that they would want to, is this personal, do these people actually know you, or is it not personal and somehow you ended up in the wrong chat room or something? I really don't know. How do you think that came about?
Well, I think there may have actually been, some involvement with. Well, I was active on Twitter. I'm not active on Twitter anymore because apparently I had a bunch of followers on my Twitter account that I didn't know I had. I suspect that some of them had something to do with some of these terror groups in the Middle East. A few of them had something to do with Anonymous, and probably a few others were bad characters that I didn't know anything about. And some of the statements I may have made on my Twitter account may have actually ticked these guys off, per se. And I might have said something where they might have felt, okay, well, we're just going to go ahead and target him because apparently he's not on the same political level as us, and we need him to be on the same level as us. So we're just going to push him a little bit, and that's it. I mean, that's vengeance right there. I mean,
okay, well, for example, with Anonymous, what is your philosophy in regard to Anonymous? Do you want to say?
You know what? I look at Anonymous as a George Soros operation, actually. I look at Anonymous as a Soros-paid operation. I've got kind of an issue. Actually, I got a really big issue with George Soros and the Open Society Foundations. I look at Anonymous as basically a paid group that is funded by George Soros. And
now a lot of people think that Anonymous is actually working on the behalf of the people, and I can appreciate that there might be other information out there. Do you have like a basis for that belief? I mean, did you investigate? Did you come across evidence?
I've investigated this. It's their cultural ambitions, actually. The cultural ambitions of Anonymous, some of it seems to go left, and then some of it seems to go right. And then there are some who go far right, and then they go far left. So it's like, it's a mixed bag of people coming together, but you don't know how many of these people are actually, you don't really know much about them, but you can just kind of read their messages, and if you're well versed in philosophy, various forms of philosophy, you can kind of see where they're going. It's almost like Occupy, which is basically it is literally a George Soros funded operation. I remember when it came out, back in 2011, I looked at it and I thought, well, that's awfully strange. The guy who came up with the Occupy Wall Street movement was from Vancouver, British Columbia, Callie Lassen. Adbusters. Adbusters is funded by George Soros. That was my first clue right there.
Okay.
Anonymous kind of played into that because some group with Anonymous in Vancouver had something to do with Adbusters based on the independent research that I did, and realized that some of these Anonymous groups may be independent, but the rest of them aren't. And some of them may actually just be, some kind of hybrid between government and the people. So you never really know. I mean, you're never gonna see the IP addresses of these people. Number one, because they do a pretty good job of covering their tracks. Right. They know enough about IT administration and computer sciences to trick even the most the most well-versed government electronic analyst working safe, probably like NSA or something like that. They can probably get around them every now and again. But I mean, seriously, it's a bunch of different groups, decentralized. Even if you think that it's a collective, it's not really a collective as much as it is. They're just basically using the name, and they're using a logo, and that's about it. They use a name, a logo. Anybody can do it. It can be, a teenager, or it could be some adults for that matter. So,
okay,
I mean, it just
so
depends
have you researched things like Snowden and how he got where he is, and also people like QAnon?
Yeah, QAnon. I've seen some of the things regarding QAnon on Gab.ai. I don't use Twitter, so I know that sounds really controversial. It's a long story. I'm not really a big fan of Jack Dorsey, so I've kind of taken a stance against Jack Dorsey and the Silicon Valley giants. But anyways, QAnon's all over Minds.com and Gab.ai. I don't really pay much attention to it because I kind of think to myself, what political agenda does this guy have? And I obviously don't have the same agenda. I have kind of I don't really have much of an agenda as much as I have a thing with just exposing things that I think are concerning. Other than that, politically, I'm libertarian conservative. So I'm basically on the same page.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. Okay, what about are you familiar with Project Camelot? Because I can't even remember how I came across you, to be honest. Did you contact me?
Actually, my aunt actually watched your videos quite a bit. At one point in time, I actually lived with my aunt, and she actually introduced me to Project Camelot. I watched a few of your videos. She kind of brought me up to speed on, she follows you quite a bit. So I was interested in that. I followed you for a little bit, and then I kind of went off and did my own thing. But yeah, I have family members that actually watched you on YouTube, and I thought, okay, well, you obviously seem pretty open-minded. So yeah, I shot you an email to basically tell you, hey, this might be possible based on, the fact that I do, white hat security awareness research on technology. This is possible because these things exist. And it's not just a government thing, it's an outside of government thing too. So There's that possibility as well. So
okay, well, the reason I'm asking you, because did you ever look into any of the aspects having to do with mind control, to do with super soldiers or your own background? Because
I have looked into Monarch Mind Control. I've looked into MK Delta and MK Ultra. I'm very familiar with those programs.
Right.
I'm aware of the fact that the CIA has declassified a bunch of their mind control documents. I don't think that's a good idea, by the way. I think that's a horrible idea. That stuff should not be declassified, because when I go into the bad adversaries thing again, number one, a bad adversary is going to look at some of these declassified mind control documents, even if some of that stuff's been filtered and some things are still classified and the rest of it isn't. It's not going to take much for a bad adversary to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to exploit this. These guys just gave me the answers to basically screw around with someone's life. I don't really like that.
Okay.
Because guys, there's guys outside of government in the underworld, in the criminal underworld, who will basically use anything to exploit anybody. It doesn't matter who it is. So I look at the CIA declassifying mind control documents as, here, let's commit Western cultural suicide. Here, go commit Western cultural suicide. You know what I mean?
That's an interesting point of view. All right, fair enough. Now, I am going to look at the chat and see if there's anyone there with some questions. Is there anything that you want to talk about that I haven't asked you about, so to speak?
I don't know. You know what? I think I've pretty much covered everything. Actually, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. Have I actually missed anything here? Oh, another thing too. When it comes to spying technologies, not everything regarding spying technologies has everything to do with government. Okay, so commercial spyware.
Right.
Okay, commercial spyware. You want to know how commonplace commercial spyware is? I can go and look up 50 vendors, and your eyeballs will be popping out of your socket. You're thinking, wait a minute, how does this stuff even get out there? Okay, commercial spyware. You've heard of FinSpy, have you not?
Yeah.
Okay, FinSpy made by the Gamma Group. Okay, well, there's the equivalent called FlexSpy. And I look at it and I think to myself, any person outside of government who gets their hands on this commercial spyware stuff can literally spy on anybody as long as they have the phone number of the person they want to spy on, right? I mean, that just gives, common people the power to act like spies when they don't have the right to be that way. Okay. That's my big issue. I mean, aside from the fact that I could go on YouTube and show you how many types of hacks can occur with your IoT device, your smartphone device, if you got one, or an IP camera system you've got, someone can backdoor an IP camera system, say inside your house or outside your house. That basically means that the whole thing, that there's so many common spying appliances out there that's sold to the general public that make me wonder why. Why does this stuff exist? If people are so paranoid about NSA surveillance, why aren't they paranoid about this stuff? I mean, I've looked at Kali Linux and I've realized that Kali Linux gives the ordinary common person the ability to basically act like the NSA, and they can go and unconstitutionally spy on anybody they don't like. I mean, that's the other thing. It's that there seems to be no control over the amount of this stuff that exists commercially or non-commercially. Kali Linux is basically licensed under, the GNU General Public License, the Apache software license, depending on who recreates Kali Linux and, writes their own code or copies the code or script kiddies it. That's pretty dangerous. I mean, I could flip through the applications right now that I have with the Kali Linux operating system I use. I don't abuse this, by the way, because I know if I start abusing it, I'm going to get a knock on the door. So that's how easy it is to basically end up in the wrong place at the wrong time, especially in that area. So Kali Linux covers information gathering, vulnerability analysis, web application analysis, database assessment, password attacks, wireless attacks, reverse engineering, exploitation tools, sniffing and spoofing, forensics, reporting tools, social engineering tools, and system services. I figure you have to have one of three things. You either have to be, an IT administrator certified to use the full operating system without getting in trouble with the laws, or getting litigated or sued by somebody who finds out that they're being targeted with one of these operating systems, or you have to be a private investigator to use it. So I always bring up that issue because that's okay. An important social. That's an important social point, more or less. I mean, if you go to distrowatch.com, which is where you find a huge list of, different distributions ranging from Kali Linux to Ubuntu to Mint to whatever to Fedora, this is not Windows. This is, free open source operating systems that exist in the public domain. Some of these things can be used by, small businesses, medium-sized corporations, enterprises, common people, but it's how the technology is used and how it's abused. I mean, people can talk about people can talk about unconstitutional spying all they like, but if they're not looking at the other side of the problem, then I don't even really think anybody has an argument, because then how many millions of downloads of Kali Linux have there been in 2018 in comparison to 2017? Millions of them. I mean, that's a lot of power in one person's hand. All right, fair enough. Now, have you been hired to be like a security guy for individuals? No, actually, I can't do that. I have to be licensed to do that, and you have to have special certifications, and you got to have security clearances, and you also have to be bonded too. So what this is basically just me blogging about the things that are possible and the things that aren't possible. That's all it is, really. Okay, someone wants to know. All right, go ahead. Sorry. Anybody like me can basically, go on the internet and come up with a hypothesis and blog about it and see if it's possible. Yes, I'm going to school as an IT administrator, but I'm not really fully certified to do anything yet until I get a diploma, until I'm basically given, you know, my diploma and my green, you know, the green light to say, okay, well, go out into the real world and make something out of yourself.
Okay, now when is that?
That's going to be it's August next year. So I've got quite a bit of ways to go.
Okay. And someone wants to know about the Tor browser. Do you think it's what it's cracked up to be?
You know what? The Tor browser, I'm a little iffy about that. There's a security researcher by the name of the Gruggy who made a point about this on his Medium blog about Tor, and that it's basically not that secure. It's not that secure. A VPN is actually more secure than Tor itself. Tor suffers from fatal flaws too. Tor is actually an open source application like Kali Linux, in that, you know, it's not perfect. It's not a corporate built piece of software. It's built by common people. They just come together as a community to basically make it something useful, but it's not perfect. Okay, I mean, if I can decrypt and break the encryption on my own router by just doing, you know, a wireless attack against it, I'm pretty sure anybody can try to break the encryption of a Tor browser or the Tor browser itself. So I mean, you know, like really, it's not secure, it's not foolproof. And I think Tor actually makes a point about that. Torproject.org, they make a point about that. It's not foolproof, it's not totally secure, and unless you know how to read code or understand or interpret code, then you would know that you would actually see fatal flaws in the code, the source code that is, anyways.
Okay, now what about AI?
AI is kind of that's actually quite interesting. I actually hypothesized creating a Wi-Fi router that could be, you know, powered by an AI. The AI would be actually a firewall. That was just one of the things I was kind of proposing. Because like I say, as an IT student, the more you divulge into technology, you think that there are things that are possible, but there are things that aren't possible. AI is kind of an iffy thing with me. AI can do some good, but depending on who's running the AI, it can be turned into bad things too. So it's a good or bad thing. Most technology is a gray area. Okay, most technologies are gray area. Whether it's black or white depends on who's using it and who's running it.
Right.
So, I mean, AI does look like it's going to happen down the road. I mean, obviously, you're going to have a war with, you know, different countries developing AI, and it basically will turn into some kind of an argument. Hopefully, it doesn't turn into anything horrible or anything like that. But
well, are you familiar with the D-Wave machine, Geordie Rose?
What's that?
Are you familiar with D-Wave, Geordie Rose?
Not really, no.
Oh wow, you should look into it. There's what's called a TED Talk. Just go onto YouTube and put in D-Wave. You know, D as in dog, wave. Okay. And Geordie Rose is his name, last name Rose, R-O-S-E. He does a talk about it. He basically thinks his artificial, it's a quantum computer, I guess, going into what he thinks is the fifth dimension, being able to telepathically communicate with you if you're in proximity. At the moment, he says if you're in proximity, governments are very interested in his machine and have bought quite a few. So it's definitely worth looking into.
I don't know. I'll look into that. That sounds actually rather interesting. Right. Whether that actually gets off the ground is another thing altogether. I mean, I can't imagine how much money that would cost to develop.
Well, yeah. Okay. Well, black projects have unlimited money, but what about if you're not familiar with sort of quantum computing? Have you looked into any of that?
I don't know. I've talked to some guys. I've talked to some guys about quantum computing. I think there's definitely potential there, but As far as how much I know about it, I mean, like I say, I'm just a basic guy who's taken an IT course. I'm not really taking a computer sciences course, but I think that quantum technologies are definitely leaping forward. Obviously, these things are being developed. Quantum technologies, maybe at one point in time in human history, millions and millions of years ago, could have existed, and it's basically just coming back as kind of a
Right.
regurgitation of memories that were buried inside of us all these millions of years. I mean, come on, think about it, right? I mean, you got to remember, Atlantis apparently existed 2.5 million years ago.
Right.
So, we're obviously just getting ourselves back into, advancements in technology that existed way back when. Lemuria, Mu, and Hyperborea apparently existed 2.5 million years ago as well.
Yep.
So obviously, these technologies existed at one point in human history, and eventually what ends up happening is we end up rediscovering ourselves, and the technology comes back to us. Whether or not we're willing to say that we won't let it destroy us is another thing altogether. Like I say, that I cover things where nefarious people can do nefarious things with technology, good or bad, doesn't matter. And I've realized that, abuses with technology are commonplace because people obviously want to feel empowered to control people with that technology somehow. I mean, it's like anything, really.
Okay. One person is asking about having two VPNs. I don't know if you'd have one on top of each other or how that would work.
Oh, you know what? No, that wouldn't work. Actually, would cancel itself out. Two VPNs would actually cancel itself out. One would actually cancel itself out, and the other one would still operate. You can't really do that. I've heard of some people, hypothesize about Tor and VPN. That seems incredibly hard to implementate because, first of all, Tor already does its own encrypted tunneling, and VPN does it too. So
Right.
to have two different types of encryption programs running with each other, no, that doesn't seem to work.
Okay.
I mean,
Sorry.
That wouldn't work. Obviously, I've tried it myself. I've tried to do the Tor VPN thing. I've tried to run two VPNs against each other, not against each other, with each other, and they cancel out. So
Okay. Last question. What do you think about blockchain and the whole, Bitcoin and all of that?
I think blockchain technology is fine. Bitcoin, I'm a little iffy about because of all the scams, the hacks, ranging from databases being pulled. A lot of this Bitcoin stuff, a lot of databases get hacked by black hats, criminal hackers who are willing to exploit a miner's Bitcoins and to make himself richer. And then also at the same time, what Bitcoins are used for and what ethical practices are, used to facilitate Bitcoin transactions. I've been on the Tor darknets. I've seen what's sold for Bitcoin, and I think to myself, wait a minute, none of this stuff's ethical or even legal. So yeah, no. Blockchain technology, I think blockchain technology has a lot of potential. You could actually build a whole new internet with blockchain technology.
Okay.
So that's one way of looking at it. I mean, you could literally, restructure an entire brand new internet off of blockchain technology. Instead of IP addresses, you could just have, Bitcoin addresses or something like that acting as, IP addresses, and it basically works on a decentralized ledger where it's basically, decentralized. It's not connected like a regular IVP4, IVP6 based internet, but it's definitely, that's definitely possible. I actually look forward to seeing if I can actually do something like that, if I acquire any knowledge or the ability to do something similar to that down the road, then I may actually consider doing it.
Okay. All right. Well, it's very interesting talking with you. I appreciate your sort of being so forthright about everything, and I think you've got an interesting angle on stuff. I hope that we can have you back as you make progress, and if you have certain topics you think that you want to talk about or expose, feel free to get in touch.
Yeah, for sure. It was great. It was actually great doing this interview. I've never actually done this before. This is kind of new to me. So.
Okay, cool.
All
Well,
right.
yeah, it's that's great, and I think everyone's enjoyed it from the look of the chat there. So, like I said, stay in touch.
All right, for sure.
All right. So, thank you very much, and I'll let you go. I'm gonna close this one out and see. So, not. I just have to make sure I don't close the wrong window. All right. So, take care. So that's our show on Mindware, and there's more to it. Mindware. There's an interesting video on the internet. In case you haven't seen it, it's called. I think it's called Mindware, and it's about Michael Aquino, the sort of dark magician who was head of Presidio for a while and has worked in the military, etc. Um, I know Miles Johnston did an interview with him not too long ago. So he has quite a few things to say about that. This is a really big topic. We're talking, with this particular person, Terry Gillett, about the kind of nuts and bolts on the ground, what's accessible to consumers, etc. And he has an interesting angle, and as well as background, he also is being a TI gives him a certain perspective as well as a technical guy. So that's, I think, valuable. He's also obviously what considers himself a white hat security person. So that's a whole different angle also on the mindware, mind war technology, hacking, mind control, etc. So hope you enjoyed the show. If you know other people that, or you're one of those kind of people that are interested in all of this, you have a background, you've written any books, or you know somebody that you recommend I interview, very interested in interviewing more people about these technologies. So thanks for listening and watching. As always, I'll be back next week, and have a great weekend. Take care. Bye bye.